This next poem, Wandering About an Albuquerque Airport Terminal by Naomi Shihab Nye, is something that someone gave me as a gift. I did not know about this poem until about 3 weeks ago. I mean, I've read Nye, but I did not know this particular poem. And he said, you've got to read this poem. It's about what we meet in this kind of spiritual group. And he said, you've got to read this one, Paul. He said, I think it'll mean something. And I loved it. I loved the poem right from the start. And I'd like to read this one because it's a poem really about breaking bread. It's a poem about communion. It's about a poem of coming together with the stranger, okay? She says, after learning my flight was detained 4 hours. Now this is going to be happening, I understand, more and more, okay? unless something is done. After learning my flight was detained 4 hours, I heard the announcement, if anyone in the vicinity of gate 4A understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate 4A was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing loudly. Help, said the flight service person. Talk to her. What is her problem? We told her the flight was going to be 4 hours late, and she did this. I put my arm around her and spoke to her haltingly. Shudawa, shubiduk, habibti, stani shwe, min fadlik, shobit siwi. The minute she heard any word she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought our flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for some major medical treatment the following day. I said, no, we're fine. You'll get there, just late. Who was picking you up? Let's call him and tell him. We called her son, and I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and would ride next to her, Southwest. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. And then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic, and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets, I know, and let them chat with her. This all took up about 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling about her life, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, out of her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the traveler from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There are no better cookies. And then the airline broke out the free beverages from huge coolers, non-alcoholic, and the 2 little girls for our flight, one African-American, one Mexican-American, ran around serving us all apple juice and lemonade, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones and thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in this gate once the crying of confusion stopped, has seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. Excuse me. Boy, talk about coming together as a community, huh? With mamul cookies, huh? Or communion. Now I'd like to read two of my own poems, and then just make a couple of points about how to write poetry and get it published and et cetera, become famous by next week. This one is called Putting Out into the Deep from Gloucester. Remember I told you that there was that week that the director said, what I want you to do, Paul, is write poetry. And this is one of the poems that came out of that experience. The sea wind whispers and the tall oaks shake, their leaves shimmering in the August noon. And now the dry grass wrinkles and the floorboards flame, saffron motes, a distant bird cry, this brackish sea. What was it you figured the wind might say? The oaks sway gently this way and that. Like young girls they sway, their long locks shaking in the golden green. They are singing to themselves, something only they can understand, the sequins of their shadows shimmering with song. Like some burning bush touched only by the wind, they shine. For the past 2 days you've waited by the threshold, tied out, tied in, then out and in again, as if calling someone. Your old stone boat sits there on the shore, ready to take on those deeper waters as if it really could. Again, the plum-purple waves are beachward washing, each cold comber composed of spume and granite. And still nothing seems to happen the way you configured to yourself. Though somewhere out there in those depths, continents collide, and somewhere dying stars implode. The frequencies of air are filled with foreign gargle, and all the indices are down or going under. Nowhere in Aquinas will you find a rationale for so-called private property, Father is exhorting, as his little congregation, composed mostly of seasoned religious women, nod their heads. Cold comfort there, you think, considering what you've already lost. But the gospel seems to back them. It's the scene where Peter goes out into the depths to fish as the Lord has told him to. And behold, the first fish he catches has money where its mouth is, enough to pay the noisome temple tax not once, but twice, for his master and himself. Found money, no? Mayhaps there is a lesson there for you. And if there is, pray tell me what it is. When Jesus, striding the blue-black waves there in the pre-dawn dark, called out to Peter to come to him, impetuous Peter leapt overboard at once. Somehow the yawing waves half steadied him, and with baby steps, or like a drunk man on the dizzying ice, began walking on the waters towards the bedazzling figure, who stood there like some blown beacon beckoning him. At which point, Peter must have told himself that this was easy. So who needed him? Which is when the rock went under, spluttering in that insane, gasping sea. Only Christ's fast grip upon his wrist had saved him then. How often he must have thought back on that shock moment to try and sort out what had happened. So take a moment now, O scholar of one candle, and look up from your desk. The oaks are quiet now, and the sun, that King of glory, has since moved on. The clouds, like full-fed crowds, are gone, and the choiring girls have turned again to trees. They know that somewhere, now as then, the wind keeps whispering still. And I'd like to end with a poem to my wife, which I stole, by the way. We were doing Lectio Divina, and I stole it from the Bible, okay? I stole it from Genesis. That moment before the fall, when Adam and Eve walk in the cool of the evening in the presence of God. I just love that image. When we walk together, for Eileen. When we walk together in the cool of the evening, walk together, you and I, in the cool of the evening, after the heat of the day, after the long hours under the sweating sun, after the buzzing words like black flies had at long last ceased their querulous stinging, after the questions, after the answers that refused at last to answer anything at all, in the cool of the evening, when we walked in the garden, you and I, in the cool of the evening. When it was no longer important for either of us to speak, since the words, whatever words they might have been, would have been beside the point, would have said nothing our hearts did not already know, where simply being there in the cool of the evening was all that finally mattered. With the long night coming on, and the last trill of birdsong fading off in the distance by the ridge of the tree line, when we walked together there in the garden, in the cool of the evening, you and I. Okay, just a few comments here. If you'll turn to the next page, key points for the seminar. You ready for all the key points now? Here we go. I stole this from Father Jim Martin, a Jesuit, whom I love very much. He's a good friend of mine, and he just seems to always get it right, or most of the time. Here's Father Jim Martin on the Ignatian composition of place, used for the sake of poetry here. So when we speak composition of place, we think of prayer, but I want you to also think about composing a poem, about how to go about one way about going about composing a poem. He says, essentially, because I've learned a great deal from the Jesuit exercise, I have to tell you, really. Even before I made them, I realized that there was a real, I'd been using them, or a form of them, for a long time before that, and then it was almost like Ignatius was just explicating it for me. Essentially, in imaginative prayer, you attempt to place yourself in a biblical scene by using your imagination. Well, you can start with a biblical scene, and then, of course, you can go on. It can be a scene you remember your grandmother, or you remember a pet, or you remember your son or your daughter, or you remember a stressful situation, or you remember a peaceful situation, and you focus on that. You stay with that. You stay with it. You meditate on it. Okay? And then with time, and you need time. There's no way around this. You can't be twittering, etc. Okay? You can't be texting. You really have to focus on this. Okay, what else is going on? I'm going to tell you a little story here. I'll tell you how this can work. This is an ad lib, okay? Years ago, I was asked to become the dean at Notre Dame, okay? Yeah, I know. I had just written, I know, yeah, what a mistake. Anyway, at that time, this was the early 80s, I had just published this enormous book, about 900 and some pages on William Carlos Williams, okay? And so they were looking for, quote, a Catholic intellectual. And so they said, yeah, they wanted one. So Tim O'Mara drove out this way. He said, I'm coming out here, I'm dropping my daughter off, and I'll like to take out to lunch down in Amherst. And we talked, and he said, I want you to come to Notre Dame. And I said, well, He said, well, come on out. We'll make you an offer you can't refuse. So I did. I went out, and it was very, very nice. Father Hesburgh was there then. And I was really drawn. I mean, first of all, they were going to double my salary overnight, okay? They were going to send all my sons to college for nothing. I mean, okay? So I talked to my wife about it, and she came out to South Bend, and she wasn't happy. I mean, being from New York, if she could have somehow pulled South Bend down to Brooklyn, say, or the Bronx, so it might have worked, but this wasn't gonna work. And then I remember going upstairs, and I had my 3 boys up there, and I was reading them a story, and I remember my middle son said, "Daddy, don't do this to me. I got friends here, you know." And it really kind of hit me. It really, don't do it, Dad. You know, please don't do this. So I went to a priest friend of mine, and what I did is, Father John Johnson, he's passed since, but he used to do like a light hypnosis. He said, look, just to kind of center me or focus me, okay? And he said, look, why don't you, we'll try this out, okay? So he said, so we got into a room, and I sat there, and he said, okay, now I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to, there's a beautiful elevator, and it's got all kinds of bells on it and everything like that, all kinds of neon lights. It's gorgeous. He says, I want you to go into that elevator and push the button down, go down. So, this took longer than I'm saying it, so we focused. Go down, down, So finally, okay, we get down to the bottom, and he says, okay, now open the elevator. So I push the button, I open it. He said, what do you see? I said, I see a lawn. I see a beautiful stretch of lawn, green lawn in front of me, composition of place. He said, okay, now walk out of the elevator and tell me what you see. So I walk out of the elevator, and I say, oh my God, there's my father. There's my father. He's got a payloader, that's the kind of work we did. He's got a payloader, and he's driving across this field, and he's got the bucket on the payloader up like this. And he said, well, follow him. So I followed him. He says, okay, now what? He said, well, he just stopped the payloader, and he's in front of, oh my God, it's a cemetery. Okay. He said, has he stopped in front of any particular place? He said, yeah, there's a stone there. He said, okay, can you read it? Okay, I go over. My father takes the payloader, meanwhile, takes the bucket, turns it upside down, and all this money, gold, jewels, everything falls out of it, okay? And he dumps it right on this cemetery plot. I said, can you read what it says on the stone? I said, oh my God, it's my name. It's my name. He said, okay. He said, what does this tell you? I mean, you don't have to be Freud, to figure this one out, or Jung, or, So I said, well, I guess I'm not going to Notre Dame. And so I called Father Hesburgh, and I said, Father, my job is to teach and to write. I'm sorry, as much as I would like to do this, I can't do it. And everybody I've told the story to says, are you crazy, man? No, only my best friends have said that to me. But no, so I didn't go. I didn't. But it's just how these things can work, this composition of place when you start to meditate on something and go deep into it. So what does he say here? He says, choose, he says, for example, he says, take St. Mark. Today is St. Mark's, right? Feast day. Today, right? Yeah. St. Mark's feast. Mark's account of the healing of the paralyzed man in Mark 2. In this marvelous story, the man's, you remember it maybe, huh? Friends cut a hole in the roof because they want to get their, the person that they've got with them who's paralyzed down in there. And so they use some ingenuity. Instead of waiting out there, they climb up on the roof, cut through the thatch, and bring it down, and bring their friend down. As in any prayer, you first ask for God to be with you, remembering that any grace you receive in prayer, grace in prayer is in itself a gift from God, and this will do for poetry. I have to tell you, for me, not not for a lot of people, but for me, poetry is a grace, okay? Poetry is a grace. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Here's why, okay? When I was 35, I had written some poems. I actually won $10 once, okay? And I bought a rosary for my Lutheran mother. She was delighted. And I remember that I stopped writing after that, and I said, I'm going to be a professor. You know, I can't write poetry. I'm going to have to teach it. That's how I'm going to make bread, you know. And then when I was about 35, they asked me, I was a member of what they call a Cursillo. Some of you made that name, you know, and Father Eddie Keyes said, I want you to be the rector on this weekend. I was 35. I didn't think I was ready, but he said, you're going to do it. I mean, will you do it, excuse me. So, or the same thing. Right? So I said, okay, I'll do it, Father. So it was an extraordinary experience. I had no idea how deep it was going to go. But after the Cursillo weekend was over, we did this up in North Adams, in the western part of the state. And when it was over, we all went down to say a prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament downstairs. And when it came my turn, I said, I don't want anything. I'm just so thankful that I had this, this opportunity. And the Spirit said, stop it, will you? He said, ask for something, will you? So I said, well, if there's one thing, if I could have it, I'm 35 now, right? If I could have this, I will do my best with it, okay? And he said, I'd like to write poetry again, like I did when I was a teenager. And that was it, okay? So I went home, and in the next 6 months, I wrote an entire book of poems, okay? But it has to be, anytime I try to stray away from that, remember, sort of like, then I lose it, do you know what I mean? So it's a bond, okay? It's been given to me personally as a gift. That's what I'm saying here, it's a gift. And so I respect that gift, okay? So, all right. So here we go. So you get this, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? You really try to compose this in your mind. And as this happens, the imagination is working all the way through it, you see. And what does he say about the imagination? He says, on the next page, I won't read this all, he says, this is Jim Martin, okay? He says, imaginative prayer involves trusting that God is at work through your imagination, and through whatever emotions or insights you may experience. At first, this was hard, he says, for me to accept. Praying like this seems silly, as I told my spiritual director in the novitiate. Isn't it all in my head, I asked? Aren't I just making it all up? His wise answer freed me from my doubts. You believe that God can work through all sorts of things in life, through your mind, your heart, your soul, right? Yeah, I said tentatively. So why can't God work through your imagination? Of course, not every experience of imaginative prayer will feel satisfying or produce earth-shattering results. Sometimes it will be dry, and there will be dry periods. But that doesn't mean nothing's happening. Something very deep is happening. You're just not aware of it. You can't quite articulate it yet, you see? Yeah, that's really, yeah. But even in these seemingly dry prayer periods, you are spending time with Jesus in the world of the Gospels. Spiritual transformation is taking place at a deep level, even if you can't see it. Spending time with God always changes us. Other times, though, this kind of prayer plunges you right into your favorite gospel passage. There you are in the middle of it, noticing things that you never noticed before about Jesus, about the apostles, about the people he touched, about first century Palestine, about yourself. And once that happens, you may never again hear that gospel story in the same way. Now, I say, apply this to your own writing and to your own poem. Do the same thing with the composition of place and focusing. Go deep into yourself. Go deeper and deeper. I know when I teach poetry here, this often happens. It takes weeks sometimes before the students are really ready. They think that they know what the poetry, all of us really, you know. And then after you gain their trust, hopefully, you know, they go deeper, they go deeper. I remember having a Jewish student 2 years ago. This is an extraordinary, he was all over the place. He'd traveled all over, you know, et cetera. He was a good-looking guy. He had a lot of girlfriends, the whole bit, okay? All right. And this was in a memoir class, which was in many ways the poetry. I mean, the language was very poetic, you know. And then he explained. He said, I was in Barcelona, I was in Vienna, I was in Venice, I was in Rome, I was in Florence, I was in Berlin. He said, and then I went down to, because I'm Jewish, he said, I went down into the Negev desert, okay, south of Jerusalem. And he said, I met a group of other Jewish students, young men and women like myself, and they were from all over the world, Australia, they were from South America, you know, they were from Europe, Canada, et cetera. And he said, there we were around a fireplace, and we were singing a song in Hebrew. And he said it was an extraordinary experience. And I said, you've just touched something, perhaps for the first time this semester, that really is you, right now. I said, don't let this go. Don't, you know, just brush it off. Stay with this and see what happens. About a year later, last year, he wrote me an email. He was back in Jerusalem. And he said, I think I found what I was looking for. So, you know, I mean, just, this is how these things can work. Sometimes it takes years to get, sometimes the poems come like grace notes, boom, like that, you know? Other times it may take months as you dig deeper. What is it that I'm after? What is it that I want to say here? So I would suggest that, you know, you give those a try, okay? And then secondly, very quickly here, the sacramental aspects of the everyday. Some of you said, Father Hopkins, for example, finding in the world around him that sense of God's presence. Discerning the presence of the mystery in the everyday world around you. Think about that. I wouldn't advise this, though, while you're driving on 91, okay? I remember looking at these beautiful cloudscapes, and I'm going 75 miles an hour, and I had to back off on that one, or I wouldn't be here today. But I mean, you can actually get into these moments, you know, just looking at, I mean, Hopkins used to look at clouds, or he'd look up at the stars at night. I mean, how often do we come home at night and we don't even take, say, 10 seconds to just look up, you know, at the moon or the stars? Is the moon right now waxing, or is it waning? Which is it? It's what? It's what? It's full. Okay, good. There was a trick question. Okay. Yeah, you know, you might be inside watching television, and suddenly you notice, where's that light coming from outside? And you think, but it's coming from the moon, you know? Or the birds in the morning, you know, these days, you know. I know I have a nephew who says, every time I hear those birds, they wake me up, I want to break their heads. I said, Patrick, you know, cool it, man. You know, there's more to it than that, you know. Close your eyes, focus, pray, let that deeper world within you, a world shaped by what we experience in our world every day, speak to you with or without words, listen for its promptings. In some deep way, this is true, I believe this, we are all poets who use our imaginations every single day, whether we write poetry or not. I believe that. We all have that poetic instinct. So I'm going to stop here and open it up to a series of questions. You know, anybody who would like to. There was one question you had asked about Hopkins. Yes, I'm going to try to answer that now. You were right when you said that you had been in Wales, right? Yeah, and it's true. One of the things that transformed poetry, Hopkins actually transformed poetry, even though in his own lifetime he published virtually nothing. It was only 30 years after his death that Robert Bridges, his close friend who was then Poet Laureate in England, published a slim volume of Father Hopkins' work, 30 years after his death, okay? In the last year of the war, World War I. One of the things that Hopkins learned that changed his whole way of looking at poetry was being in Wales and hearing the Welsh, like the Irish. You know, hearing that language, so close to, you know, London, where he'd grown up in Hampstead, but hearing the lilt of that language, he loved it. He loved it. And he asked, well, here's what he did. He asked his superior if he could please learn Welsh so that he could convert the Welsh. And and the superior said, Gerard, you're not going to transform. It's not that easy. But yes, you can go out and you can learn Welsh, okay? So he went, there was an old woman who lived about a half a mile away, and he would go to her for the Welsh lessons. He learned it, he learned the Welsh language, he learned Welsh poetry, and it changed with the deep, beautiful vowel chiming of the Welsh, of the Celtic, you see. It transformed what English language was capable of doing, just like that. What him and that relationship with that elderly woman who taught him, you know, Welsh. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight, stuff and dapple dawn, drawn falcon in his riding of the rolling level underneath him, steady air, you know, that kind of sound. And you can actually hear the hawk, or feel the hawk, you know, as it moves around. And yeah, he did. He changed poetry. He extended himself. I'm doing the same thing. It's turning out I did a biography of William Carlos Williams, and one of the things I didn't realize when I wrote it, I was 40 when it was published. So one of the things I didn't realize is how deep that Carlos in the name William Carlos Williams was. And it's only over the years as other poets, Latin American poets, have come to the fore and shown me just how deep that relationship is, how many times, for example, they've discovered quite a few poems that Williams translated from the Spanish, you see. One of them he translated was a book by Quevedo, which he translated when his mother, who was in her 90s at that point, in order to get her to talk about herself, he would sit by her bedside and he'd say, we're going to translate Quevedo, Mom, this kind of folksy, this is a book that was written about the time of Shakespeare. But what he was really hoping for is that she would tell him who she was. You know what I mean? What her background was, who she was as a human being. And she kept watching him. Are you trying to learn something about me? But he did get enough information. But the point is that it was that connection. She was from Puerto Rico, and you know, that Spanish tradition that he was able to pick up, and it just enriched his own. And here's a guy who's writing what they call poetry in the American idiom. And what I'm learning is that he got the American idiom from the Spanish. I mean, this, you know, of course, you know, I mean, why not? You know, I mean, we speak about American, you know, it's North America, but it's also so much more South American. But what Williams would do is he'd take the poetry from the Spanish poets and then translate that. And he said, this is different from anything that they're doing in the English tradition, you know, the English literary tradition. It's new, it's fresh, you see. It's one of the things about translation that paying attention. Okay, so let's just open it up to anybody who might have a question or a comment or an insight or vision, whatever. Yes? Yes, that's right.
I just wondered, what's your take on the best way to get a handle on Williams?
Well, you know, to start with, Wendell Berry is a good reader. He's a very close reader, and he's got something of the same personality, you know, some of the same heart, the same makeup that Williams has. So if you want to start with a good poet like Wendell Berry, who's doing a take on Williams, that's a good way to start. Then you want to go to my book. I couldn't, yeah, I'm kidding. But there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there. I suppose, you know, get a hold of the selected poem. I mean, if you know, Williams, I mean, get a hold of the selected poems. But you know, it's funny, I'm writing a biography right now of another American poet, Wallace Stevens, which is the hardest one I've ever written, you know, I've ever tackled. He's so complex, he's so dense, so difficult. But what's interesting is to watch him, that is Stevens, when he's living in New York City. up until 1916, and William Carlos Williams, who's right across the river, across the Hudson River in Rutherford, New Jersey. And these two guys are meeting in New York City at a place, at an apartment on West 67th Street, owned by a fellow whose name is probably slipped out of, Walter Arensberg. Okay, he's the one who was a good friend of Marcel Duchamp, you know, the painter. But they come together, and it's so interesting to watch these two Americans, one from Reading, Pennsylvania, and the other one from Rutherford, New Jersey, okay, both in New York now, one a doctor, one a lawyer, as they discuss the way poetry is going to go. So, you know, you can pick up letters of a poet, and they're fascinating. You can pick up a short story by a poet, and it's fascinating. With Williams, I never get tired of him. You know, I just translated to make, for penance, what I did, okay, is, or to make up for my failures earlier on, Jonathan Cohen and Julio Marzan, they forwarded me a short memoir by a Spanish poet that he wrote about having a visit with William Carlos Williams back in 1958. It's never been translated. So my job was to take it and turn it into the American idiom, you know, to turn it into something like, you know, like Williams would approve of. And so I put that together, and what they're talking about is Ezra Pound, of all things, you know, back in '58, because he had just been released from prison after, you know, spending 12 years there. But it's fascinating to just, it's like suddenly you're in the room, you know, at Nine Ridge Road, and you're with Williams as he's talking to these three Spanish poets, you know, Latin American poets who have come over to his house to interview him, you know. There's always, yeah, it's great, yeah. Yes, please.
This is just a comment.
Sure.
I was struck by the transformative and healing power of poetry. I'm not sure how conscious you were of what you chose for today, but in the context of what's happened in the past week, the courage, sharing, not being afraid, all the words that came to me today just transported me from the terror and the fear to a place of Eucharistic healing. And it was the juxtaposition of the works.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to get your head around that one, but this helps, you know, this kind of thing. You know, when I think of those who ran out instead of, you know, and helped people who had lost limbs, or, you know, whose arteries were severed.
In limbs not his, Christ present in limbs.
Yes.
And
Yes, yeah.
sharing of the cookie.
Yes.
The women who, you know, covered
Yes.
the white.
Yes. Yes.
But also covered in other things. And the generosity of their hearts and the words they spoke to each other, and not being afraid. And go back to the Annunciation, and having the courage to allow the Spirit to propel in the most unexpected way. But thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
But this, you know, I guess from that, the question always about poetry being esoteric, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not.
Well, you know, okay, let me say a few words about that. Yes, I've worked with esoteric poetry, okay? But there's something, I mean, personally, I come from a working class background, okay? I'm the oldest of seven children. I grew up in New York City and then moved out to Long Island, et cetera. And I've never wanted to lose those, you know, those roots. That's who I am, you know? And what good is it if you're writing for half a dozen people in the world, you know? I mean, that's not, you know, share it. It's a gift. It's bread, you know what I mean? And I mean, that's personally. You know, other poets will say, no, it's for the chosen few, you know, there's 6 people, most of them are my family, who will read, you know, who will read this. But no, my own sense is, you know, not that it can still go deep. Do you know what I mean? It can still go deep, but the voice is there, and it reaches you. And then the more you look at it, it's like the first title of my first book of poems was called Timing Devices. talk about time, but timing devices, and which I meant by timing devices, the sense that you experience the poem, and then you come back to it, and and if it's a good poem, it should refresh you again, just like a Bible passage. You read it when you're 18, you read it when you're 30, when you read it when you're 60, 70, and each time it refreshes, like love, yeah. Yes, please.
On the theme of poetry is healing, I just want to share. I've spent for about 3 years, I spent an afternoon at the VA in Bedford reading poetry to late-stage dementia patients. And it's absolutely extraordinary. These are men who are 60, 70, 80. They're very agitated. They're nonverbal. And to sit in the middle of the room and to have 20, 25 very agitated men settle down such that the staff can also sit and listen. And it's been such a gift. And it's so extraordinary to go there every week and know that there's going to be a sharing. They don't say anything, but you can tell from their eyes. And sometimes sometimes they will speak. And a gentleman just wake up, hold out his hand and say, "Thank you." And he hadn't spoken in a couple of weeks. And it's just, those moments. And it's poetry. It's all kind of, from Hafiz to Mary Oliver.
Yes, Mary Oliver's another one,
Yeah. She's kind of my go-to.
Yeah, no, I understand, yeah. Mary Oliver, yes.
Read all kinds of stuff. And it's been one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I used to bring communion to the elderly and the dying, and there's always a gift. There's always a gift that it's just their presence, something in their eyes, a touch. Yeah. So you never go away. You think it's they touch you, you touch them. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please.
Listening to you and to the readings and speaking about the blush, I am brought back to John O'Donoghue saying that music is what poetry tries to be. And I can't help but see the poetry, the music throughout, and the sense of the words sounding like what they're saying.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for bringing that up, but that's absolutely true. How much attention you have to pay to the sound of words, the way the words dance together, the way they, Cungnith, or Welsh Cungnith, or that sense of internal chiming, for example, that Hopkins picked up, where you hear all of these internal sounds, and they're making a music of their own. Any successful poet, I think, has to be able to do that. You feel it in the, I think in every one of these poems, you can feel that part of the message is not just the words, but the way the words dance on the page, the way they're received. It's an attempt in a very real sense to arrive at or to move towards the condition of music. Although it has its own beauties because it has language as well. Yeah. Yes, please. Suppose I had a description, take my course because you'll be healed. No, that's not going to work, Dr. Sawbucks. No, but truthfully, it does heal. It does heal. I think of Saul, Mad Saul, and David playing the lyre and singing to him and comforting him. The students that I remember the most were from the Vietnam War, that students who had returned, when I was teaching at UMass, and they'd seen a lot of pretty serious stuff, and how poetry was a way of just stitching together the wounds, you know what I mean, of somehow getting back to some core. Any other yes, please.
Bill Moyers had that fantastic series about poetry, and I think one of the things I picked out of it was that he said that poetry is the only thing that lasts in civilization.
Who said this?
Bill Moyers.
Ah, yeah, he stole that. He stole it. He stole it from Ezra Pound, who said, poetry is news that stays news. You know, which is a kind, yeah. But that's true. I mean, it's, if you think about it, listen, I could think about this. Dante, he's died back in 1321, you know, but he's still, when I read him, you know, he's still very much here. Eliot's gone. Hopkins is, you know, gone. We only have a short time, essentially, here. But the poems, Sappho, Virgil, you know what I mean? You read them, Catullus, Horace, you know, Homer. And you read them, usually in translation, but a good translation, and they're alive again for you. You're right there with them. So it's amazing how much news simply gets, you know, you wrap fish with it after a day or so, you know. I mean the newspapers, you know, or you use it to start a fire or something. But you don't do that with poetry, you know. No, that's true, yeah. I wish more people knew that, you know, could feel that. But, you know, poetry has a bad rep, too, sometimes, doesn't it, in the country. I'll tell you another story about my father. When I was a kid, I was 16, and I didn't have my license yet. I was working with him, and we had the dump truck, and we were going, you know, to work in Camp Bauman down in Merrick. And I could see his jaws working one day, and I said, what the heck is the matter? So he pulled the truck over to the side of the road. He said, Paulie, he said, I hear you've been writing poetry. Is this true? I said, well, yeah, Dad, I've been writing a couple of little things, you know, not much, you know, nothing get scared about or anything. He said, he started the engine up again and he said, it's okay, you're still my son. Thanks, Dad. Anything else? Anybody have any? Yes. Oh, no, well, no. I gotta try other people first. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes, please. Send him to Siberia, you know, etc. Yeah. No. Plato did not trust poets. In fact, I remember being on a panel here with people from political science, and they looked at me and they said, you know, one of them said, you know, I don't trust poets. I said, I don't trust you either. You know? So let's start, you know, and see if we can go forward. No, Plato did not, you know, because he said it was a lie. You know, the poetry was a lie. It was a fiction, and therefore could not be relied upon. What Plato didn't understand, I like Plato, he's a nice guy. But I think he may have been too literal-minded when it came to what the poem can offer, okay? If I bring up Plato, I do it as a joke, you know. Yes, poetry, so many poets have said this. Hopkins he said, you have to read the poetry aloud. You have to. And it's advice that I give my students. Read it out loud. Try to get a human voice behind it. People who are theater majors understand this, you know what I mean? They understand the importance of the dramatic voice. You know, Shakespeare's one thing on the page, and Shakespeare's another thing when that, you know, those lines are read out. And it's the same thing with poetry. There's very little poetry that is meant only for the eye. I'm thinking of a poem by E. Cummings, okay, called Grasshopper. And really it's just a typographical trick. You know, I mean, that's the way the letters go. And then it suddenly reforms into, and then it transforms again into grasshopper. And so what he's trying to give you is a visual sense of, you see this swirl of something moving in the grass, and you say, what was that, right? Then you look at it again and say, I think it's and then you say grasshopper, okay? But that can only go so far, you know what I mean? It's pretty hard for most people to say, you know. But yes, poetry should be, including Cummings, should be read out loud. You know, one of the things you should do is, how about this? Read a poem to someone else. Read a poem to someone else. You know, we've lost this sense, you know, of sitting around a table, you know, and just reading something to someone else. It's beautiful. It can be scary. I remember one time, for example, I was driving with my wife to Scranton, and I was reading Joyce Carol Oates. And it was one of these scary pieces that Oates had written. And I took on the voice, because she was driving at this point, I was reading, and I took on the voice of this mad killer. And as I went on with it, she said, "You creepy man, you creepy man, stop that right now." You know, she said, "I've just seen another side of you." Okay, sweetheart, listen, you know, what I'm hearing here, I've not had the privilege of meeting many of you before, but I have a feeling that many of you do some kind of therapeutic work. Either you do it, you know, professionally, or you do it simply as part of, you know, we all do it, you know, as part of our lives. But yes, poetry, just the sound of poetry. Oh boy, you know, Maya Angelou, just think about this. I mean, just think about jazz. You know, when you hear that trombone, you know what I mean? And your soul just goes down, you know, or it goes up. It's lifted up. You know what I mean? Absolutely. And the same thing with the poetry. You know, Langston Hughes and County Cullen, Maya Angelou. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yes, please. Listen, I notice it's late. I mean, you know, it's getting late. It's already 10 after, right? So why don't we call it an evening, all right? Read poetry. Okay.
And Paul Mariani said that poetry is grace. Paul Mariani, your grace for Boston College.